Have you ever seen your parents' old phones? Like, they're super clunky, you know what I mean? Like, they look funny, they feel funny. They're kind of fun to play with though, but they don't have any apps on them. Like, there's no real use to these other than making phone calls and text messages. It might have a camera, I'm not actually sure, but these guys, there's not really any good use to them anymore. Like, compared to one of the new iPhones, the newer ones, really, your options are endless. You could do so much with this. There's apps for everything. You can make phone calls, use it as your own computer, all of that. But this guy, what am I gonna do with him now? I guess you could use it as a coaster, but I don't really have any other uses for it. You see, we can see the value difference in both of these phones, and one of them is definitely more valuable than the other. But sometimes, for us, we can feel like these two phones, right? Like, when we feel good, we got our hair done, we look good, maybe even our crush actually said hi to us today, we feel like the newest iPhone. Maybe you feel a little bit more like this guy, where nothing is working out for you today, and everything else just feels a little bit gross. And maybe you're feeling more like this than you are this. And what's interesting is that we all have those days, but there's a lady in the Bible who very much felt like this. And she felt like this for a long, long time. It's actually a woman who she's described as having an illness where she's essentially constantly bleeding for 12 years. Can you imagine 12 years of bleeding? That's gotta be awful. And some of the things that we need to know before we talk about her story is that with her being a female, she automatically was in the lower class, meaning she didn't have a lot of value in the people around her. But because she was sick, she had even less value, because anyone with a sickness or an illness really was kind of declared unclean, meaning that no one wanted to be around them, no one wanted to be near them because they didn't want to catch it either. And so when we pick up her story, we're actually going to encounter a moment where she sees Jesus, encounters Jesus in a way that he brings her value back. So we're going to actually look in and hear her story in Mark 5, verse 27. So go ahead, pull up your Bibles, and we'll read it together. She had heard about Jesus, so she came up behind him through the crowd and touched the fringe of his robe, just the very ends. For she thought to herself, if I could just touch his clothing, I'll be healed. And immediately the bleeding stopped, and she could feel that she had been healed. That's pretty incredible. Jesus realized at once that the healing power had gone from him, so he turned around to the crowd and asked, "Who's touching my clothes?" His disciples said to him, "All this crowd is pressing around you. How can you ask who touched me?" Really, what they're saying is, like, everyone's touching you. Like, how can you know the difference between one hand and the next? That's essentially what they're asking. But he kept looking around to see who had done it. Then the frightened woman, trembling at the realization of what had happened to her, came and fell at his feet and told him what she had done. He said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace. You have been healed." You see, what's fun about this story is that while she felt a lot like this phone for several years, Jesus stepped in and said, "Hey, I believe you have much higher value." You see, Jesus has a way of making those who are disrespected or outcast, he has a way of making them feel like they have greater value. Because in Jesus' eyes, you do have a much greater value. You see, for Jesus, it was really important. Jesus shows respect to those who are disrespected. That was a very important thing for Jesus and still is. And so for you, maybe you feel like this old phone sometimes. And maybe it feels like others disrespect you or make you feel like this old phone. But Jesus constantly advocates for us to remind us that we are of a much higher value. You are worthy of respect. You're worthy to be loved. And so for us, we need to learn to receive that, to know what it feels like to be loved and valued, but we also need to return it and give it to others near us. And so what does it look like for you? To remember that you have so much value. And how do you value and respect others in return?